Beyond the cobalt horizon, a new story is waiting to be told to those who are brave enough to seek it. Join our latest expedition into the unknown and discover the beauty of a world without limits. Subscribe today and follow us toward the next big cinematic reveal. My son-in-law sat across from me at my own kitchen table and told me I was a liability. That's the word he used. Liability. Like I was a line item on a spreadsheet. Like 41 years of mortgage payments. Of patching the roof myself every other autumn. Of planting every oak tree in that yard with my own 2 hands. Like all of it added up to nothing but a problem that needed to be managed. My name is George Keller. I'm 67 years old. I taught high school shop class in Millhaven, Ohio for 35 years, and I have lived in the same house on Creekwood Lane since 1989. 3 acres, a 2-car garage converted into a proper woodworking shop, a vegetable garden that my late wife Patricia started, and I've kept going for 14 years since she passed. Nothing fancy. Nothing that would impress a man like my son-in-law, Brandon Marsh. Brandon was 38, a real estate developer out of Columbus, and the kind of man who evaluated everything, including people, by what they were worth on paper. He married my daughter Claire 6 years ago, in a ceremony at a vineyard he'd selected because it photographed well for social media. I wore my good suit. I smiled in every picture. I told myself what parents always tell themselves. She loves him, and love is enough to build on. I was wrong about that, but I wasn't wrong about everything. If you're watching this, please subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to tell you is a story about what happens when a man spends 35 years quietly pouring himself into other people, and then one day, those people pour right back. Brandon had been nudging at my property for about 2 years before he finally came out and said what he meant. It started small, the way these things always do. Comments about how much land I was sitting on. Observations that the school district had changed and the neighborhood was appreciating. Questions about whether I'd ever thought about right-sizing, which was his word for getting rid of something too big for you to deserve. "Dad, you've got 3 acres here," he said at Thanksgiving the year before last, standing at my kitchen window with a glass of wine, looking out at the yard like he was already measuring it. "You know what that's worth right now? The market is insane. You could walk away with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life." "I live comfortably right now," I said. He smiled the way he always smiled when I said something he considered simple, patient, tolerant, like he was humoring a child. "I just mean you wouldn't have to worry." "I don't worry," I said. That was true. I'd paid off the house in 2011. I had a teacher's pension and Social Security that covered everything I needed, and my needs had never been large. I drove a 2009 Ford F-150 with 190,000 miles on it that I maintained myself. I bought my clothes at the same hardware store in town that had a rack of Carhartt in the back. I didn't own a single thing I couldn't fix with my own hands, and that was a source of pride I didn't feel the need to explain to Brandon. Claire stayed quiet during these conversations. That was the part that hurt. She'd grown up in this house. She'd learned to ride a bike in that driveway. She knew exactly what this place meant, what it had held, what Patricia and I had built here together. But somewhere along the way, she'd learned to let Brandon finish his sentences before deciding how she felt about them. The Tuesday it all came to a head was in October, about 7 months ago now. Brandon called and asked if he could come by to talk through something. He used that tone he had, the one that was professionally warm, the tone of a man who'd sold a lot of people things they hadn't asked for. He showed up alone, which I noted. Claire wasn't with him. He sat down at my kitchen table, accepted the coffee I poured him, and then he opened a leather folder on the table between us. Inside was a property assessment. A real one, done by a licensed appraiser I'd never authorized. He'd had someone come out and value my home without asking me. The number at the top of the page was just over $480,000. "I wanted you to see what you're actually sitting on," he said. He said it gently, like he was doing me a favor. I looked at the number. I looked at him. I didn't say anything yet. "Here's the thing, George." He leaned forward. Brandon always leaned forward when he was making a pitch. "My parents are getting to an age where they need more space, more support. My dad's mobility isn't what it was. My mom can't manage their condo stairs anymore. They need a single-level home with some land, somewhere quiet. He paused. This place is perfect for them. I set down my coffee cup. Is that right? I know this is a lot to hear, and I want to be clear, I'm not asking you to just walk away with nothing. We'd make sure you're taken care of. There's a very nice senior community over in Westfield. Independent living, one-bedroom units, all the amenities. You'd have people your own age around. Activities. You wouldn't be out here alone. He glanced toward the window, toward Patricia's garden, toward the workshop, toward the oak trees. You wouldn't have to keep up with all of this. All of this, I repeated. It's a lot for one person, George. Be honest with yourself. There it was. That last sentence. I'd heard variations of it for 2 years, and every time he said something like it, what he was really saying was, be honest that you are old. And old means diminished, and diminished means you don't get to decide anymore. I looked at him for a long moment. He was very comfortable at my table. He had the folder open and a pen ready. There was a document behind the assessment. I could see the edge of it. Something to sign, most likely. Brandon, I said, how long have you been teaching? He blinked. What? How long have you been teaching? In a classroom. How many years? I'm in real estate, George, you know that. 35 years, I said. I was in a classroom for 35 years. Before that, I spent 8 years as a machinist. Before I was a machinist, I grew up on a farm outside of Findlay, where we fixed every piece of equipment we owned because we couldn't afford to pay anyone else to do it. I closed his folder. I've been solving problems longer than you've been alive. I don't need you to be honest with me about myself. His jaw tightened, just slightly. George, I'm trying to help. You're trying to acquire, I said. Those aren't the same thing. He sat back. The warmth in his voice cooled a fraction. Claire and I have talked about this. She agrees that Claire can tell me herself what she thinks, I said. She knows where I live. Brandon left 20 minutes later without getting what he came for. He was polite about it. He was always polite, but I could see it in the set of his shoulders as he walked to his car. This wasn't over. This was just the first meeting. He came back 3 weeks later, this time with Claire. She sat across from me with her hands wrapped around a mug, and she wouldn't quite meet my eyes for the first few minutes. I made her the chamomile tea she'd liked since she was a little girl, and I sat down and I waited. Because I knew my daughter, and I knew she needed a minute to find the words she'd rehearsed. Dad, she said finally, I just want you to think about what's practical. I'm listening, I said. This house is big. 3 bedrooms for 1 person. You're doing all the upkeep yourself. Because I enjoy it. And what happens if something happens to you? You're out here alone. If you fall in the workshop, if something goes wrong, Patricia and I planned for that, I said. There's a medical alert system. Carl Beyer next door has a key. I have a primary care doctor I see every 4 months, and he tells me my blood pressure is better than his. Brandon, who had stayed quiet longer than usual, spoke then. George, I think what Claire is trying to say is that we've found a real solution here. My parents need a home. You have more home than you need. This is a situation where everyone benefits. Everyone, I said. The property would stay in the family in a sense. In a sense, I said. My parents would be close by. Claire and I could check on you more easily at Westfield. I don't need to be checked on. He exhaled. George, the patience in his voice had developed an edge. I've had this property looked at. I know what it could become. A subdivision of this land alone could generate... You've already drawn up plans, I said. Silence. I looked at my daughter. She looked at the table. How long? I asked her quietly. She didn't answer, which was its own answer. There are plans, Brandon said carefully. Preliminary. Conceptual. Nothing is decided. I decide, I said. My name is on the deed. I decide. He set both his palms flat on the table. The politeness was almost gone now. George, I'm going to be straightforward with you. You're 67 years old. At some point, this property is going to transfer. The only question is whether you do it on your own terms, with real money in your pocket, while you can enjoy it, or whether it happens later, when you have no control over any of it. He held my gaze. I'm trying to give you the better outcome. I thought about Patricia then. I thought about the summer we put in the back deck together, the two of us measuring and cutting and arguing about the spacing on the boards, and then sitting on it at dusk with cold beers and feeling like we'd made something permanent. I thought about my daughter riding her bicycle down the driveway in 1994, falling, getting back up, riding again. I thought about 35 years of 16-year-olds coming into my shop class, not knowing which end of a hammer to hold, and leaving knowing how to read a blueprint, how to cut a dovetail joint, how to solve a problem with their hands instead of their mouths. "You should go home," I said. Brandon picked up his folder. His face had settled into something cold and professional. "Think about it, George. The offer won't stay this good." After they left, I sat in my kitchen for a while. Then I went into the workshop and I stood there in the smell of sawdust and machine oil, looking at the walls. I had a pegboard on the east wall with every tool in its place, outlined in marker so you always knew where everything went. Patricia had called it my tool museum. Students who came to visit after graduation always commented on it. That's when I picked up my phone. Not to call a lawyer, not to call a realtor. I opened my contacts and I started scrolling, and I started a group text that I sent to 43 people. "Hey, it's Mr. K. I need you to know something is happening, and I could use some advice from people I trust. Can we talk this week?" If you think about what 35 years in a classroom means, really think about it. It means you teach somewhere between 25 and 35 students every single year. It means that by the time you retire, you've had your hands on the education of somewhere close to 1,000 kids. Most of them drift. Some of them you lose track of entirely. But a shop class is different from other classes, because you don't just hand them information, you give them a skill, and skills leave a mark. My former students called back within the hour. Marcus Webb, who'd been a quiet, angry 16-year-old when he walked into my class in 1998, and who was now the head of the building trades department at Columbus State Community College. He called me back from his office and listened to the whole story without interrupting once. "Mr. K," he said when I finished, "what do you need?" Diana Perez, who'd struggled with the lathe her whole first semester, and then one day just got it, who now ran a custom furniture company in Cincinnati with 12 employees. She texted back within 20 minutes. "Say the word." Robert Chu, who used to stay after class 2 or 3 times a week just to keep working on whatever project he had going, and who was currently a licensed structural engineer with a firm in Cleveland. He didn't text, he called. "I can drive up Saturday," he said. "I'll bring whoever you want me to bring." There was James Holloway, who'd gone into law and made partner at 41. There was Stephanie Briggs, who'd left Millhaven and come back 20 years later to run the County Planning Commission. There was a city council member named Phil Okafor, who'd nearly failed my class and had thanked me at his swearing-in ceremony in front of his entire family. There was a retired Army engineer named Darnell Price, who still called me every Christmas. There was a woman named Louise Tremblay, who was now a federal contractor and had, 3 years ago, driven 4 hours to help me re-roof the workshop when she heard I was planning to do it alone. I talked to 29 of them over 4 days. They asked questions, they gave advice. Several of them offered to consult lawyers. Robert Chu offered to have the property assessed by his own firm, independently, to establish my legal standing. James Holloway told me he'd reviewed enough estate situations to know exactly what I needed to do to protect myself, and he walked me through it step by step, for free, as a friend. But the thing that surprised me, though, looking back it shouldn't have, was how many of them just said some version of, "Can I come?" I told them yes. I called Brandon on a Thursday and told him I'd been doing some thinking and that I'd like to have everyone over on Saturday morning to talk it through like adults. He sounded satisfied when I said it. He told me he'd bring his parents, which was fine. I said I'd have coffee ready. He said he appreciated my willingness to be reasonable. That word, reasonable. I'd been hearing it from him for 2 years, always shaped like a compliment, always meaning compliant. Saturday morning I was up at 5. I made 2 pots of coffee and set out the good cups. I unlocked the workshop and turned on the lights. I went out to Patricia's garden and stood there for a minute in the cold, just looking at it, thinking about her, thinking about what she would have said about all of this, knowing exactly what she would have said, because I'd been married to her for 31 years and there was almost nothing I didn't know about how she thought. She would have said, "George Keller, you didn't spend 35 years teaching children how to build things just to let somebody else tear yours down." By 8:45, the street in front of my house looked like a parking lot. They came in ones and twos in small groups. Marcus drove up from Columbus in a gray pickup. Diana brought her business partner, a tall woman named Renee, who shook my hand with a grip like a contractor. Robert Chu arrived with 2 colleagues from his firm. James Holloway came in a blue sedan with a briefcase, which made me smile. Phil Okafor showed up in his city council jacket, which he probably wore for effect, and it worked. Louise Tremblay pulled in at 8:55, rolling down her window and saying, "Mr. K, you look exactly the same," which was flattery, but I appreciated it. By 9 o'clock, there were 31 people in my yard. They weren't standing there angrily. Nobody had a sign. Nobody was shouting anything. They were just there, in the yard, talking to each other and drinking coffee from the extra cups I'd set out on the folding tables on the porch. From the outside, from the street, it probably looked like a neighborhood gathering. A cookout, maybe. Except it was October and nobody was grilling anything. Brandon arrived at 9:15 with Claire and his parents, Walter and Nancy Marsh. Walter walked with a cane. Nancy looked pleasant and confused in equal measure. Brandon got out of his car, looked at the yard, and stopped walking. I watched him take it in, watched him try to process what he was seeing. He knew some of these people, he'd met a few at the wedding, in passing. But he didn't know who they were to me, or what they did, or why they were all standing in my yard on a Saturday morning looking completely at home. I walked out to meet them. "Good morning," I said. "I made coffee." Brandon looked at me. "George, what is this?" "Some folks I called," I said. "People whose opinions I value when I'm making a big decision." His father, Walter, extended his hand and I shook it. He seemed like a decent man, honestly. I had no issue with Walter. "Good to meet you, George," he said. "Brandon's told us a lot about the property." "I imagine he has," I said. "Come on in, let me introduce you around." We moved through the yard and I introduced my former students, not as former students, as who they were now. This is Marcus Webb. He runs the building trades program at Columbus State. Marcus shook Brandon's hand. "This is Robert Chu, structural engineer, 15 years with Meridian Engineering in Cleveland." Robert nodded. "Diana Perez. She owns Perez Custom Furniture in Cincinnati. 12 employees, ships nationally." Diana smiled. "James Holloway, he's a partner at Holloway and Keene in Columbus. He specializes in property and estate law." James held eye contact with Brandon for a beat longer than was comfortable, and I watched Brandon notice it. I kept going. "Phil Okafor, Stephanie Briggs, from County Planning, Louise Tremblay, Darnell Price in his veteran's cap, teacher after teacher after student, each one with a job, a title, a life that had been shaped in some small way in this house, on this property, in the workshop where Brandon wanted to put a subdivision." Brandon had stopped shaking hands about a third of the way through. Claire had started crying quietly, standing at the edge of the porch, and I let her. When the introductions were done, I asked everyone to gather, and I stood on the porch steps so I could see all of them at once. My former students, Brandon and his parents, and Claire with her eyes red and her hands clasped. "I'll keep this brief," I said, "because I know some of you drove a long way. I want to say first that I understand why Brandon thought what he thought. He saw an old man living alone on 3 acres, driving a truck with 200,000 miles on it, and he made a calculation. I don't entirely blame him for the calculation. It's how he was trained to look at the world." Brandon started to say something. I raised a hand, not unkindly, and he stopped. "But I want to explain something about this property that hasn't been said out loud yet." I looked around at the yard. This house was built in 1974. I bought it in 1989. My wife and I raised our daughter here, and we raised this house together, repaired it, improved it, put every callus on our hands into it. The workshop in the back was built from materials I salvaged from a demolished school building in 1993. The oak trees in the yard were planted the year Claire started kindergarten. That garden in the back was my wife's. She put the first seeds in the ground in April of 1991. And I've kept it going every year since she passed, because some things are worth the labor, even when the person you're doing it for isn't there anymore. I paused. A robin was singing somewhere in the oaks. The morning was clear and cold and very still. This isn't just a piece of real estate. It's 35 years of a classroom I brought home with me every night. Every one of these people standing in my yard learned something in this house, in that workshop, or at that kitchen table, or just from watching someone do a job carefully and with respect for the craft. And if you're going to tell me this place is wasted on me, you need to stand here and look at every single one of them and say that to them too. Because they're part of this property just as much as any deed. I turned to Brandon directly. I'd been patient. I'd been measured. But there was one thing left that needed saying out loud. The thing that every comment and question and argument circled around and never quite landed on. You've been telling me for 2 years that this house should go to real family, I said. Real family. You've said that phrase to me more times than I can count, and every time you say it, you mean blood biology. The idea that a house belongs to whoever shares the most DNA with the person who built it. I kept my voice level. Brandon, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about your answer before you give it. He was very still. What is your biological relationship to me? The yard was quiet. You married my daughter, I continued. My daughter who I raised, who I taught to drive in this driveway, who I helped with her homework at that kitchen table for 12 years. By your own logic, the logic where only blood counts, you have no claim here at all. Not one molecule of it. So when you talk about keeping this house in the family, I genuinely need you to explain to me which family you mean. Because by every definition you've been using, you don't qualify. Brandon opened his mouth, closed it. His father, Walter, looked at him with an expression I'd seen before on parents at school events, the particular look of a father who has just heard his son say something he can't defend. Nancy had her hand on Walter's arm. Claire said, quietly, Dad? I'm not angry, I said, still looking at Brandon. I want to be clear about that. I'm not angry, and I don't want this to be something we can't come back from. But I need you to hear me. This house is mine. I decide what happens to it. And what's going to happen to it is this. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out a folded document. Last week, James helped me put this property into a revocable living trust. My daughter is the sole beneficiary, which means that when I'm gone, this house goes to Claire, not to be developed, not to be subdivided, not to become anything other than what it is unless she makes that decision herself, freely, without pressure, after I'm not here to have an opinion about it. I handed the document to Claire. She took it with both hands. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at me, and her face was doing something complicated that I recognized as the face she'd made as a little girl when she was trying not to cry in front of people and failing anyway. I'm sorry, she said. She didn't say it to the yard. She said it to me. I know, I said. I looked at Walter and Nancy Marsh. I'm sorry you made the drive. I genuinely wish you well. And I hope you find the right home for your situation. If you want, Marcus probably knows more about the housing market in this county than anyone in the state. He'd be glad to point you in the right direction. Marcus, to his credit, nodded immediately. Brandon stood in my yard for another few seconds. He looked at the people around him, 31 of them, easy, standing quiet and patient and completely unintimidated, and I watched something go out of his posture. Not dramatically. Just a slow release, like pressure leaving a system. I hear you, he said. His voice was flat but not hostile. It was the voice of a man recalculating. People began to drift and talk after that. Marcus got into a conversation with Walter about single-level homes in the area. Louise found her way to the workshop and stood in the doorway looking at the tool wall. Robert Chu sat on the porch steps and talked with James about something I couldn't hear, but that made them both laugh. Claire came and stood beside me. When did you call all of them? She asked. The same night he brought the appraisal. She was quiet for a while. I should have said something earlier. When he first started talking about the house, I should have told him no. Yes, I said. You should have. I thought I was being practical. You were being afraid, I said, which is understandable. But afraid and practical aren't the same thing. She leaned her head against my shoulder the way she used to when she was small, when she'd had a bad day and didn't have the words for it yet. I put my arm around her and looked out at the yard, at the oaks, at the garden, at the workshop with the lights on, and Louise standing in the door, and I felt something settle in me that had been unsettled for 2 years. Brandon came to find me before they left. Walter and Nancy were already in the car. He stood in front of me with his hands in his jacket pockets, and he looked, for the first time since I'd known him, like a 38-year-old man rather than a real estate professional. I want to say I was just trying to help, he said. But honestly, I think I was trying to solve a problem I invented. He paused. My parents need a house. That's real. But I think I convinced myself that your situation was a problem too, because it made the solution cleaner. It's easier to help someone if you can first convince yourself they need it, I said. He looked at the ground. Yeah, Brandon, for what it's worth, your parents are going to be okay. Good people find their way to good places. You don't have to manufacture a solution out of my property to take care of them. He looked up. He nodded once. The trust document, he said. James filed it properly? It's binding? I almost smiled. Even now, checking the structure of the deal. Fully executed, I said. Recorded with the county last Thursday. Okay. He said it like he was closing a file. And then, more quietly, I'm sorry, George. Take care of my daughter, I said. That was all I asked. They drove away around noon. The last of my former students left by 2 o'clock, after coffee and sandwiches and a long conversation in the workshop where Marcus got hold of a hand plane and started cleaning the blade because the angle was slightly off, and then Diana took over. And then there were 4 of them crowded around my workbench debating grind angles like it was the most important thing happening in the world, which, at that moment, it was. Louise was the last to leave. She stood by her truck and looked back at the house, at the oaks, at Patricia's garden in the back, where the last of the autumn kale was still standing. You know what I always remembered most about your class? She said. Tell me. You used to say that the best thing you could build was something that outlasted you, that the point of making something wasn't the making, it was the staying. She looked at the house. This place is going to outlast you, Mr. K, by a long way. I watched her drive away. Then I went inside and washed the coffee cups. I dried them and put them back in the cabinet where they went. The same cabinet Patricia had chosen in 1992 from a catalog she'd dog-eared and carried around for a month before deciding. That evening, I sat on the back deck, the deck we'd built together, Patricia and I, arguing about board spacing in the summer heat, and I watched the sun go down behind the oaks. The garden was quiet. The workshop was dark and locked. Everything was exactly where it belonged. There's something I want to say to anyone watching this who is in a situation like mine. Not necessarily about property, or money, or legal documents, but about the thing underneath all of it. A man can spend his whole life appearing to have very little, and actually be surrounded by wealth so deep and wide that it can't be counted in any currency that shows up on a spreadsheet. The wealth isn't in the acreage. It's not in the appraisal number on the first page of a leather folder. It's in 35 years of showing up every day and doing the work carefully, and passing something real from your hands into someone else's hands, and watching them carry it away and build something with it that you'll never fully see. Brandon never asked me what I'd done for 35 years. He knew the title shop teacher, and he heard it as a kind of diminishment, as something a man settled for, as a story that ended small. He never asked what any of those 240 graduates did after they left my class. He never asked what the workshop was worth to the people who'd learned in it, or what the house was worth to the girl who'd grown up in it, or what the garden was worth to the man who'd kept it going for his wife for 14 years after she was gone. He saw a liability. I had lived a life. Those are not the same thing, and I am old enough now to say that without apology. The trust is filed. The house is protected. The oaks are still standing, thicker every year, the way Patricia said they would be when we planted them, and I expressed concern that we wouldn't see them in their full growth. We'll see enough, she said. She was right. She usually was.